Welcome to Dear Social Worker, Let's Talk, the podcast that prioritizes you, the person behind the title. I'm your host, Lisa Ann Edwards, and I'm here to help you become an emotionally intelligent social work leader and promote your well-being at the socialworkcoachinghub.com. Welcome to another episode of Dear Social Worker, Let's Talk. And today's podcast is titled Creating Trauma-Informed Social Workers with VR Service Manager Shalene Lemmie. So let's talk. Welcome to the Dear Social Worker podcast.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here and just to talk everything VR.
Yeah, I'm so excited. And the main reason why I'm so excited is because I've tried this. I've tried it. So I know exactly what the VR is about. I've experienced it and I still talk about it to this day. The impact was so great. So I'm really excited for social workers to hear about this, not just for practice, but also we're going to touch on some personal growth elements later on in our discussion. What inspired you to be part of this discussion and to share more about all things VR?
My background's in social work, so I'm a registered social worker with over 15 years experience in children and families work. And actually, I came across the VR about 3 years ago, just quite randomly, to be honest. And what happened is I experienced it for myself, so a bit like you, and it just blew me away. I just felt actually this is something that we need as part of our kind of social work training and also as part of our continual social worker development. It is so just to kind of give a brief overview for those who haven't seen it, what it is VR is used quite a lot in gaming. So some people may have an awareness of VR in gaming, virtual reality, and how you can kind of simulate different environments. What we've done, and we were founded by an adopter who felt that actually we need to understand children's journeys a bit more in terms of their trauma journeys, thinking about our most vulnerable children that come through our social care doors, whether that's kind of right at the early stage, early help, through to obviously the other end and being placed maybe for adoption. Um, and what we've done is we've made a library of films where it puts you in the perspective of that child and it gives you the experience of really walking in their footsteps, experiencing maybe that abusive home environment, experiencing the responses from professionals. And I think it's really important because I think quite often we talk a lot about in social work child-centered, child-focused practice. And sometimes it's about, well, what does that actually mean? What does that look like? What does that feel like as well? And that's really crucial to our social work practice. And you're put in a headset and you are literally that child. You are literally having that real kind of emotional felt experience as well. So it is experimental, but actually what it does is it allows you really to be in the footsteps of that child. And I think for me as a social worker, one of the things we would always talk about in the office is I'd love to be a fly on the wall in that home environment to really feel what it was like for that child. And for me, the VR, that's the closest that you're going to get without actually being there, and being that child. Just even something as simple as in the VR, it places you at the height of a child. So even if you're a practitioner walking into some of these home environments, which you will do, and see the environment and see the issues and the concerns around, actually you're still the professional. So there's a different power dynamic. You've got a different hat on as well. So you're still not truly seeing it from that child's point of view. So something as simple as being in the headset and being small and just feeling that sense of actually I'm completely reliant on these adults, and there's something about that in terms of that complete shift in perspective. Um, so yeah, so it was just something that I felt actually this is amazing. I'm an experienced social work manager at the time, and there was still lots of learning even for me, despite being in different roles across the years. That actually there was just so much learning and so much power in this experience that it just automatically made me think of certain families that I've worked with, certain children that I've worked with, and reflecting, really given that opportunity to really reflect on my own practice and thinking, actually, would I have done things a bit differently? Would have I have taken different steps maybe, or had different conversations as well and discussions in regards to some of the assessments as well?
Thanks for sharing that, Shalene. You're right, it does cause you to reflect on what kind of conversations, or how would you change the conversations you had with parents or with children, knowing what you experienced through the VR. Are you able to share with us, Shalene, some examples of specific scenarios or experiences that the VR program offers to users?
Yeah, so in terms of how it works is our local authorities will contract with us and get the headsets. We will train them up, and then practitioners will use them in their work. And like I was saying earlier, in terms of we very much were founded by an adopter, so it started in the fostering and adoption world. Um, and the aims around some of that was really to help our foster carers and our adopters really understand the children that they're going to be caring for, but then also to help them understand why we as the social care practitioners are coming in and saying, well, actually, you need to parent differently than maybe what you may have seen in your families, or if you've got children yourself, how you've parented your own children, because actually it's about thinking about their journey, and that looks very different to maybe some of the children that you have had just around you, really. So it's about kind of really connecting the dots around trauma, but also that felt experience, because I think there's a lot of kind of, particularly in the fostering and adoption world and kind of the processes, there's lots of obviously training, there's lots of preparation, and a lot of it can be really kind of theory based. So a bit like some of our social care training as well, you know, lots of theories, and actually connecting that theory into practice can be very difficult. So as well as for our practitioners, it can be the same for our foster carers and our adopters as well. And I think that's where the VR was born out of that kind of disconnect, because I don't think everybody can translate that into practice in the same way or quite easily as well. And it's about how do we support people to do that.
Mm.
Um, and so that's kind of where we started. So that's where it has been used for the last kind of 4 years, is very much within kind of the skills to foster and the adoption preparation groups, and really kind of going back to the beginning, like you were saying, the unborn child and that particular experience. We've all been in the womb, but none of us can remember that experience. None of us can really kind of make that tangible connection. But actually, what we do know through research is that development is already happening. You know, actually, harm is already happening if that's the environment that that particular parent is in, and we can hear that and we can feel that. So how it then kind of translates into training, so again, social care training, so it also is being used in terms of inductions for newly qualified social workers and your ASYEs as well, and thinking about that real induction process.
Mm.
So one of the ways that I talk to a lot of our partners to use it, particularly around kind of your newly qualified, is around recording. You know, recording is a huge amount of social work practice,
Oh,
think, and observational skills as well, and thinking about what are you seeing when you're going out. So as well as kind of some of those discussions that you're having with the families, it's about what else are you observing, what else is kind of happening.
mm.
um, and so you can go in the headset, you can watch vanilla films, come out, and then there can be a task about actually now you record what you've just seen.
What are the variations of recordings you've had as part of that training?
So I think what we've got is a lot more child focused recording. It's about actually thinking from the child's perspective, because again, as I was saying earlier, I think some people find that difficult to place themselves in the child. So actually what you was getting recording would be kind of these statements or these lines that you'd mostly pick up in quite a few of the cases, but
Mm.
actually what does that mean, and what does it mean for that child and the uniqueness of that child as well, you know, actually. So what we have been finding is that actually the recordings are more specific to that child, thinking about that individual child and their circumstances. We are finding less of the jargon as well. So, you know, some of these clear jargon statements that we would get and we pick up quite quickly in social care. Um, because again, it's about that interpretation. It's about actually what does that mean? Um, and what one of our partners found as well is they found from their assessments that actually the quality of their assessments improved since doing this piece of work. They were a team that actually the assessments through audits wasn't very good. It wasn't really, the child wasn't leaping off the page. They weren't getting a clear message of who that child is. And actually they done this piece of work and then they audited again. And what they found was they knew who the children were in these cases from picking up the case notes or the assessment, because actually it was more drilled down and focused on who is this child, what are the issues and how are they impacting this child, and less adult focused, which is what we want. We want to know what is the impact on the child if this continues, and then what those next steps need to be.
Well, thanks for sharing that, Shalene. There might be some social workers here that might be thinking, how do I write in a trauma informed way? And one thing that came up for me while you were talking was just including how they're feeling after seeing or observing or experiencing the family home.
Just on that point, in terms of how they would be feeling after kind of seeing a home or environment, I think the VR really kind of gives that opportunity for that to be kind of tested out, because actually what it does give you is it gives you a really difficult environment to be in, and you are in that environment, and actually it really allows for reflection. And I think definitely for social workers day-to-day practice, it can be really busy. You're jumping kind of from one environment to the next. You're jumping from maybe writing one assessment and then maybe a court statement, and actually there's so much that you're juggling, and you don't always get the time to reflect on actually what you've just seen, what you've just experienced, what you've just felt yourself. And by having a VR experience and being placed in that, you immediately come out, and like you were saying earlier, that anxiety that you felt, you can really kind of use that to have that reflection space, because it's about really digging deep within yourself in terms of, I need to now reflect on, what does that mean?
Mhm.
What has that brought up for me? Number one, because actually what we do know is that our own personal circumstances carries through in all of our work. Our own values, our morals, our ethics, that's really important. And we do obviously start talking about that as we train, but it's about how do we kind of keep resetting and keep coming back to that through our social work journey and through
Mhm.
the day to day, to be honest.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so I think one of the things is you can use that. You can use the VR, you can use your peers, you can use it in supervision to really reflect on where you're at, how you've kind of felt, to be really open with that. Because I think what's important is, if we're not sharing that, or if we don't have an outlet for how we feel when we have just been in some of these environments, we are going to keep carrying it.
Mm.
And then what we do, and what we're at risk of, is being desensitized to situations and to environments, and therefore kind of picking up on the trauma informed stuff. We're not really recognizing the extent of maybe a child's trauma, because maybe what we're doing is, actually, that wasn't as bad as the house I was in yesterday.
What I'm hearing is, it sounds there is a balance between managing your own emotions and then stepping out of your own emotions to step into the child's emotions.
Yeah, yeah, exactly that. Because and it's recognizing that, because actually that's what's going to drive what we're writing down on paper and what we're
Mhm.
recording, isn't it?
Yeah.
And if we're recording our own emotions rather than what's happening for the child, or we kind of lessened it in some way because we've been in worse houses a few days before, or met children with worse circumstances, then actually we're doing that child a disjustice, aren't we? We're not an injustice in terms of what their actual situation is. um, and I think, we talk a lot about reflection in social work. And again, it's about having the space to do that. It's about being open and honest about that, and thinking about, what do I bring to the table? And I think the VR helps with that as well, in terms of some of the values
Mm.
and base that people have, in terms of when we are looking at situations, and how much of that are we bringing into that because of our own experiences and thoughts and opinions, and how much of that is actually the child's experiences as well.
Yeah.
And I think that reset is what the VR helps with.
Mm. Mm. Thanks for sharing that, Shalene. This is such an insightful conversation to hear how much VR brings the realities and the child's world to life. And one thing
Yeah.
that came up for me while you were talking there was around cultural competence. How does it play a part in either A, the training, or B, the recording, that reflection process, thinking about how we integrate the child's world in our recording based upon the trauma informed approach that we've now got, now we've done the VR training.
One of our partners, that's a really good point that you've made. So we've got films where one of the children um, is dual heritage, and it's an adoption team. And what they've used is they followed her story to really look at the matching process,
Mm,
um, and to really raise that cultural and that ethnicity and that diversity conversation. Um, and what was quite interesting was that obviously these conversations are being had, they are being had, we know they're being had, but actually, how deep are those conversations going?
mm,
And so what they've done is they've used this child's process, her whole kind of journey, which you can experience through the VR. They've used that to really step in a bit deeper about what is the best match for that child. So if we can't find a dual heritage family that reflects her ethnicity, then what are we looking for? But then break it down again in terms of the cultural aspect. But also, she may be, and as she is in there, she is a dual heritage child, but she's predominantly lived with white parents.
mm,
Then she's moved into, say, a white foster placement. So again, thinking about her transitions and thinking about that differently. So cultural aspects are really important. And I think what the VR has allowed is for that team to really dig deep about, so what are we looking for? What would be the best match for her?
mm,
Given her experiences, given her kind of knowledge, what does that actually look like for her?
mm,
And not maybe thinking automatically it looks like A, when actually it may be B is the right situation for her. And I think
mm,
that's really important. And that's a really kind of creative way to use the VR again, so we can have those non judgmental conversations and discussions, but start digging deeper about the different layers to this for the children that we are working for, in terms of to find them a placement, a lifelong placement that
mm,
will meet all of their needs, and actually thinking about what is being prioritized for that child as well. What does that look like? But also, how do we then help that child transition through the different kind of cultural aspects if they are going through foster care and then ultimately ending up in an adoptive placement as well? So that's just one example of how is being used in adoption around that kind of cultural competency, and really digging deep about what are we talking about here. And this isn't a tick box exercise. We need to really have these really deep, honest, open conversations, and be thinking about, actually, because we've got two children who may have the same ethnicity or heritage or cultures, doesn't mean they will be having the same placements, because we need to consider other factors within that as well, and their experiences. So it's just not kind of thinking about a one size fits all, because we're maybe looking at one area. We need to consider that whole child's experience and that whole child's cultural aspect, religious aspect. There's so much that comes into play. And I think the VR allows for that discussion. So we are thinking about all those different factors and not maybe just one. And then actually what we may find is the placement isn't a good match because we haven't considered everything for that child.
yeah. Thank you, Shalene. Thank you. Could you share some insights or data on the effectiveness of your VR enabled program in terms of promoting behaviour change or enhancing the ability of social workers to support children who have experienced trauma?
Yeah, so in terms of what we do is we deliver the training, and practitioners will become certified to use the VR. And what we found is that actually everybody who comes through our training already kind of qualified, been through significant amount of training. And what we found is at least 8 out of 10 practitioners will say, actually, will strongly agree that this training has changed how they think about, the child. They will also kind of, that they understand more about from the child's perspective, so actually they've got the theory, they've got the learning, but actually that real understanding about being in the child's footsteps, actually walking in their shoes, and then thinking about, what do I now need to consider? We've got 80% saying, actually, this is strongly agreed, this has improved their understanding. And that's massive, because like I said, you don't become a social worker overnight. There's a lot of training, there's a lot of theory, there's placements that you would have been involved in. And so actually it shows that this level of learning has something to offer. It takes it that step further. And I think, one of the things that I said to you on the day after you watched it, I come back to you in a year's time, and you will tell me what you've seen. You will be able to tell me how it's changed, how you may approach certain situations. You will be able to tell me as well, kind of, what were those kind of takeaway messages that you took from that experience. Whereas if I gave you a case study, it wouldn't have been the same. And that's the beauty of it. We've also had some, so it has been used with young people and their families, as part of a Triborough project last year. And that was around children and young people who were identified being at risk of child sexual exploitation and child criminal exploitation as well. And again, what we found in that is the practitioners who first done the training, they actually strongly agreed that by doing the training, they felt more confident to have these conversations and to practice where CSE and CCE was a concern. And again, that's really important, because actually these are practitioners who were already working in this area, and the VR training still had something to offer in terms of that they felt they had more understanding of the issues, because they actually kind of walked through it as part of the VR experience, but also in terms of that level of confidence. And again, that's really important, for our social work practitioners, that they do feel confident in the work that they're doing, because again, then they're able to really kind of get to grips with the work, but also in terms of having some of those maybe difficult and challenging conversations, but also being very self-aware, through that confidence in terms of what they also bring to the table, picking up on the conversation that we had earlier as well, and how that may impact their practice. And that's really important. So we've been seeing some really good results from social work practitioners using it, as well as their results that they've seen from it being used with families as well.
Could you confirm, is it a one-off training, or is it something that's ongoing? Just so the listeners have an understanding, because we've got listeners across the world. And shout out to New Zealand, I see you. And we've got some listeners who may be thinking, how can we use that? Just before you do, I just want to remind everyone, if you are not subscribed to this podcast, why not? Click subscribe if you're on Apple and if you're on Spotify. You're listening every week anyway. You might as well click subscribe, and you'll get all the notifications come straight to you. If you would like to find out more about my coaching services, you can visit socialworkcoachinghub.com. Get involved, get access to the hub. We have lots of resources there for you to get involved in. On that note, I'll come back to you, Shalene, to share a bit more about the way in which the VR program works. Thank you.
Thank you. You did shout out New Zealand. We do have the VR in New Zealand as well. So another shout out to New Zealand. So yeah, on the side. So yeah, how it works is that our partners, the local authorities, will contract with us. So say they kind of standard packages, they would get 12 headsets, and we would train them up, and it is a day's training to use them. And then they will start using them in their practice, and we can keep doing more training. So we can do more specific training around trauma. We've got also training that we deliver around CSE and CCE as well. And we will do refreshers, and we offer support groups. So it is an ongoing kind of package and program. And then what I do as part of my role as the VR service manager is I will regularly support our partners in their day-to-day practice and how they really implement the VR. So I will meet with them regularly. I will go and turn up to events and help support them deliver the sessions. Also, I will go and deliver support sessions. So again, if they're thinking about actually there's a new area that we want to use the VR, I will go in and support them in being able thinking about, okay, where it could be used, what that
Yeah.
program would look like.
Yeah.
As well. And if they already have got some kind of training materials, I will look through those and say, well, actually, this is where you could fit in the VR. This would be really helpful. And we also have developed some session plans that we will give to the practitioners as well to help with their use, really, of the VR.
Mm-hmm. How does the VR
No
program
problem.
not only enhance the social worker's practice, but also how does it enhance their personal growth?
Yeah. Yeah. I think it really goes back to, kind of some of the thread that I've been saying throughout is around it puts you in a space where once you come out, you have to reflect. And if that is really kind of tapping into something for you on a personal level, then it really allows you to almost hold a mirror up and start working through some of that and start thinking about what does that look like, and how will that have some kind of impact, and I think again it really allows for those opportunities in supervision to really be thinking about what you may bring to the table in terms of maybe your own experiences, and thinking about how you look after yourself. Well-being is so important, in terms of in any job, but particularly social care, because I've been there. It's really important that we do look after our own well-being, and actually we do think about our own journey and our own growth journey. And I think what the VR does is really allows for that reflection space. And I can't say that enough because I think that's really important, that we are constantly reflecting. And that's how we grow. We grow through that reflection process,
Mm.
that reflection in action, on action. And it's about thinking about those different points in our journey and in our growth journey and having that space to do that.
Shalene, it's been a pleasure with you being here on this podcast and sharing more about the VR and supporting social workers with that trauma-informed approach. I ask every guest to write a verbal letter to the social workers listening and starting it with Dear Social Worker. And it could be any point of reference, support, inspiration, whatever is on your heart to share with social workers.
Dear social worker, one of the quotes that we really embody here is Harper Lee's quote: "You never really understand a person until you consider things from his point of view, until you climb into his skin and walk around in it." And I think that is so important to everything that we do. And so I would just like to say, hold on to that, really, in terms of every day when you're going out to do your work, but also hold on to your curiosity. Always be curious, in everything that you do. And thank you. Thank you for everything that you're doing day in and day out for our most vulnerable children and families.
Thank you, Shalene. Where can people find you?
You can find us on LinkedIn as Anster, that is ANTSER, or you can find our website, which is www.anser.com. And I'm also on LinkedIn, Shalene Lemmie, as you can see my name. So please connect.
Thank you, Shalene, for being a guest here on the Dear Social Worker Let's Talk podcast. We'll be back next week for another installment. I will see you then. And don't forget to click subscribe.